In this video, I'm going to show you how to create some really cool comic book graphics in Adobe Illustrator that you can use to create your very own blank comic book template to sell on Amazon. Hey guys, Craig here. Now for those of you who are new to my channel, my name's Craig Babin and I'm on a mission to turn my part-time drawing hobby into a full-time income. And I'm hoping to inspire as many of you as possible to do the exact same thing. So if you have a hobby that you want to monetize, then hit that subscribe button because I'm going to be uploading some really useful content on this channel that you are not going to want to miss. That being said, let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to create your very own blank comic book template that you can sell on Amazon. Using Adobe Illustrator, I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of creating some really cool comic book graphics that you can use on the cover and in the interior of your comic book. Plus, I'm going to show you a little trick that's going to help you create some really unique comic book panel layouts. So if you're ready, let's get to it. Okay, so I'm doing this inside of Adobe Illustrator, but what I'm about to show you can be done with pretty much any vector-based software. Now I'm going to be showing you how to create graphics for both the interior and the cover of your book. Normally I'd create my book interiors inside of Adobe InDesign, but because I'm going to be creating graphics for the interior of my book, I'm going to use Adobe Illustrator instead. I'll still use Adobe InDesign to lay out my book, but to create the individual graphics, I'll be using Illustrator. What you're basically looking at here is the interior spread of an 8x10 book. I'll overlay the cover template just to make this a little bit clearer. Now I don't want to be running any of my interior graphics right to the edge of the page, so there isn't a bleed on my interior spread. For my cover, on the other hand, I'll definitely be running my graphics right to the edge of the page, so there will be a bleed on my cover template. If I zoom in on the top left-hand corner of my template, you can see what I mean. The black dotted line is where the cover will be cropped, so everything on the outside of that line will be cut away. And you can see that if I turn off my cover template, the black dotted line aligns perfectly with the edge of my interior. Now, as far as the green guidelines are concerned, all they're doing is letting me know where my margins would be in the interior of my book. The top, bottom, and two outside margins are 0.5 inches, and the interior or gutter margins are both 0.75 inches. And this is exactly how I would set up my margins in InDesign. Now, if you're not exactly sure what I'm talking about when it comes to setting up your book using InDesign, I suggest that you watch my video on how to create low-content books to sell on Amazon, because I go over how to do all of this stuff in that video. I'll put a link to that video at the end of this one and in the description below. As for these middle guidelines, most comic books are divided up into 3 sections: a top, middle, and bottom panel. Putting in these guidelines ahead of time will just make the process of creating the panels that much faster. Thanks to the guides, I won't have to eye the spacing between my panels to make sure that they're all equal. I'll just be able to snap my rectangles right to the guidelines. And keep in mind that you don't want every page to look exactly the same, so you're going to be creating at least 20 or 30 different panel page templates. So that's a lot of snapping. Having these guides preset is going to save me a lot of time. Okay, so that being said, let's get started. There are blank comic book templates being sold on Amazon that are nothing more than the same 3 rectangles stacked up on every page, and that's boring. So just to make sure that our blank comic book stands out from all the others, we're going to use the expand feature in Adobe Illustrator to stylize our panels. To create a basic panel, just select the rectangle tool and then go up to the top of the page and remove the fill and set your stroke color to black, and then set the thickness to about 3 or 4 points. I'm just going to use 4 points for this demonstration. Now it's important that before you get started, that you go up to Window in the top menu and that you make sure that your Smart Guides are turned on. This way here, when you're creating your panels, your cursor will snap right to your guidelines. So just start off by creating 2 panels in the first 2 rows and then maybe 2 panels on the bottom. Now using your direct selection tool, that's the white arrow, you can select individual or multiple vertices at the same time so that you can manipulate the appearance of your panels. Now when moving these vertices, if you want to keep the movements perfectly horizontal, just hold down your Shift key or Command key if you're on a Mac. If you want to create some really funky diagonal panels, then just let go of your Shift key. Now you don't have to keep the spaces between your panels vertical either. You can just select the top 2 corner vertices for each panel and then move them simultaneously left or right. But if you want to go even further and you want to create some really custom panels, then this is where the expand feature comes in. So right now all of these rectangles are strokes. There really isn't much I can do with them except for move the corner vertices. But if I expand them and turn them into fills, then I can create some really stylized panels. So to expand them, I'm going to select them all and go up to Object in the top menu, and then from the drop down I'm going to choose Expand Appearance. As you can see, each of these rectangles has changed from a stroke to a fill. Now that they're fills, I can start to manipulate them. Rather than just have 3 panels on this page, I'm going to create a cutaway. I'll still have my 3 initial panels, but I'll also have a blank space for a much larger image. To do this, I'm going to start by creating an ellipse. And just like with the rectangles, no fill and a stroke with a line weight of about 4 points. The size of the ellipse really doesn't matter, but I'm only going to use half of it, and I'm going to snap it right to my center guideline. Now before I can work with this ellipse, I need to expand it, just like I did with the rest of the rectangles. So I'll go up to Object in the top menu and click Expand. Then I'm going to group all of these shapes together. Once they're grouped, I'll go back up to the Object tab and expand them one more time. Then I'll go back up to the Object tab once again and I'll choose Live Paint and then Make. And then once again, I'll go back up one more time and choose Live Paint and then Expand. Now that I have them all expanded, I can grab my Direct Selection tool and start deleting all the lines that I don't want. So instead of just having a boring 3-panel page, I now have a huge open area for one large graphic surrounded by 3 stylized panels. If you use your imagination, you can come up with some really cool comic book panel layouts. What you basically want to do is create about 20 or 30 unique page layouts and then just randomly insert them throughout a 100-page book. You can also add speech bubbles, thought bubbles, and action bubbles to your comic book interior as well, and I'll show you how to create those a little bit later on in the video. But before I get into that, I want to show you how to create some traditional color comic book graphics that you can use on your cover. One effect that's used pretty heavily in comic books is gradients, and there are a few ways to use them. The first is in conjunction with a starburst effect. I'm sure you've seen this effect used on many comic book covers, to give the illusion of an explosion or movement of some type. A second way to use gradients is a little more old school, and that's by utilizing the dotted effect. Traditionally, this effect was created more by the person who was inking the comic as opposed to the artist coloring it. But since they color most comic books digitally these days, you'll find that this effect is being used more by colorists than by inkers. Okay, so we'll start off by creating the starburst effect. But before I do any effect, I'm going to first select all of these panels and then go up to the Object tab and then down to Live Paint, and I'm going to make them. This will enable me to just bucket fill my color right into my panels. See, what I want to do is separate my black panel border from my fill color. And to do that, I'm going to have to go up to the Object tab one more time and choose Live Paint and Expand. Now using my Direct Selection tool, I can select each of the fills one by one, cut them, and then paste them onto my background layer. Once I have that done, I can lock out my panel layer and move it up on top of my background layer. What this does is allows me to manipulate my background images using all different types of effects, and as long as I mask out those background layers so that they don't go outside the panel borders, then any rough edge will be hidden by the black panel borders. You'll see what I mean in just a bit. Now when creating backgrounds for your comic book panels, there's nothing wrong with just using a solid color. Many comic books today do. But if you want to add a little something extra, you can easily add a gradient. To do that, all you have to do is select the panel that you want to apply the gradient to, and then go over to your gradient tool on the left-hand side and click on it. Now you can see that nothing happened. The next step is to go over to your gradient panel in the right-hand menu. If you don't see the gradient panel, you can just go up to Window in the top menu and then open it from the drop-down menu. Once you have your gradient panel open, with your background still selected, just click on the gradient ramp in the gradient panel to apply it. Now you can control your gradient's rotation inside of the menu by choosing a particular rotation setting, or you can rotate the gradient manually using the tool itself. You can also control the depth of the gradient by moving the little slider, either on the tool or in the gradient ramp in the menu. If you want to change the colors, all you have to do is click on the color points which are located on the gradient ramp. Now you can see that when the color menu opens up, your only option is black, a shade of gray, or white. But if you click on the little swatches icon in the left-hand side, you'll have the option to choose from color swatches. If you don't see the color you're looking for in the swatches, you can also click on the color palette icon to open the color picker. So as you can see, it's really simple to add a gradient to your background. This just gives it a little bit more of a stylized look. Next, I'll show you how to create the starburst effect. So the first thing you're going to want to do is select the background layer that you want to work with and apply a gradient to it. I'm going to use a radial gradient this time instead of a linear one. You can do that right here in the menu. And then I'm going to choose some different colors. Keep in mind that you can control the size of the gradient using the gradient tool. If I want to change the depth, I can just play with this little slider. So once we have our gradient, the next thing we're going to want to do is add the starburst effect. To do this, I'll need to create another rectangle. This one won't need a stroke, and I'm going to use a fill color that's a little darker shade of orange. Now this is another reason why you want to have your smart guides on. I want to make the right side of this rectangle come to a point. So with my direct selection tool, that's the white arrow, I'm going to select the top vertex and drag it down until it snaps right to the middle. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing with the bottom vertex. So what I want to do now is create a copy of this image, but I want it to be a mirror of the original on the vertical axis. So with it selected, I'll go up to Object in the top menu and choose Transform and Reflect. In the Reflect menu, I'm just going to select the vertical axis and then click Make Copy. Now I'll just pull these two apart and then line them back up so that the points are touching. With my smart guides on, they snap right into place. From there, I'll just select both of these objects and group them. Now I need to make the starburst. There are a few ways to go about doing this, but because I'm not really concerned about uniformity, I can just do this by eye. To do this, I'm just going to select my rotation tool in the left-hand column. And then I'm going to put my cursor just below the far right side of my shape. You can see that if I pull down on it, it actually rotates my shape. If I hold down my Alt key while doing this, it'll duplicate it. Now if I just hit Ctrl D, it'll just repeat that action. And I can continue hitting Ctrl D until I have a complete circle. Now there's no guarantee that it'll be spaced proportionally. In this case I got lucky and it did, so I'm going to roll with it. But if yours isn't spacing properly or you need a specific degree of spacing, with your shape selected, you can always go up to Object and then choose Transform and Rotate. In the rotation menu, just type in the degree of rotation that you want, hit enter, and then just keep repeating that function over and over until you have a full circle. There's probably an even easier and more accurate way to do this, but those are the two ways that I've always used. So now I'm just going to select all of these shapes and group them together, and then I'll slide them over on top of my background. Now I don't want this starburst to be completely uniform, so I'm going to crunch it down a bit. But I'm going to make sure that my graphic covers my entire background. The next thing I want to do is hide the middle point. To do that, I'm just going to create another radial gradient and put it on top of my starburst. I'm going to make the gradient center color a bright yellow to give it the look of a hot core. Then I'm going to pick an outer color that's pretty much the same as my center color, only I'm going to bring the opacity down to 0. This will hide my center point and then reveal my underlying graphics in a nice fade as it goes out. Then I can just resize this gradient using the selection tool until it covers my entire background. Now I obviously can't leave it like this, so what I need to do is create a mask. To do this, I'm just going to select my rectangle tool. I'll keep the fill color white. Then I'm going to create a rectangle that's edges fall directly under my black paneled border. I don't want my mask to end outside of my black border or inside of my black border. I want it to end right in the middle of the black border line. Keep in mind that the layer I'm on right now is under my panel border layer, so the panel border is on top of this mask. Now make sure that your panel layer is locked, and then with your selection tool, select all of the layers of your background graphic, including your mask. Then just go up to Object in the top menu, down to Clipping Mask, and then choose Make. Now you can see that if I turn off my panel layer, that the starburst is actually a little bit larger than my background gradient. But that doesn't matter because it's all being hidden by my panel border layer. And that's why you want to keep your panel layer on top of your background layer. Now that's the second way to utilize a gradient. Now the third way is to create an old school dot effect. Now to do this, it starts with the same process. You first have to pick a color for your background. I'm just going to use a light green. So for this gradient effect, I'm going to need a second layer. So with my background selected, I'm going to go up to Edit and choose Copy. And then I'm going to go back up to Edit and choose Paste in Place. In my background layers menu, I want to make sure that this new copy is directly on top of my original background image. And I'm going to lock this bottom image out just to make sure that I don't accidentally select it or move it. Just like all the other gradient techniques, I'm going to start off by adding a gradient to this new background image. I'm going to make it a linear gradient this time, and I'm going to make the left color slightly darker than my background green. As for the right color, it really doesn't matter what color I use because I'm going to be bringing the opacity to 0 anyway. Now I'm going to rotate my gradient tool so that the dark end is rising from the bottom left-hand corner of my background. Don't make your gradient too big, but if you do, don't worry about it because you can always adjust it later. So what you want to do now is grab your selection tool, then go up to Effect in the top menu, down to Pixelate in the drop-down menu, and then choose Color Halftone. This will open up the Color Halftone menu. Now depending on the size of your gradient and the size of the dots you want, you're going to have to play around with these numbers a bit. I'm going to start off by setting the max radius to around 30, and then I'll set the channel 1 to around 250, channel 2 to about 180, channel 3 to about 120, and then finally channel 4, I'll leave it around 45. Then I'll just click OK. The first thing that you'll want to do is adjust the coverage of the gradient itself. To do this, just select your gradient tool and then reposition the tool a little further down your background. Now I'm getting too much yellow in my dots, so I'm just going to darken my green a bit. Again, just keep playing with the gradient tool and the depth slider until you get the result you're looking for. Now if you want to change the density of the dots, with your selection tool, select the gradient, go over to your appearance panel in the far right hand column, and then just click on the Color Halftone link in the effects menu, and then just adjust the numbers accordingly until you get the result you want. There are no right or wrong numbers, it all depends on the size of your graphic and what effect you're looking for. Now you can change the look of your gradient even further by clicking on the opacity settings in the appearance menu and changing the blend mode. Once again, there's no right or wrong mode. It all depends on your personal preference. I find that normal just works best. Okay, so that's 3 different ways that you can utilize gradients on your comic book covers. Now I want to get into how to create speech and thought bubbles for both the cover and the interior of your blank comic book. Now for those of you who have been around my channel for a while, the process that I'm about to use is the same process that I taught you in my video on how to draw in Adobe Illustrator. For those of you who haven't seen that video, if you want a little bit more of a detailed explanation of this process, I suggest you watch that video. I'll put a link to it at the end of this video and in the description below. To keep this video from running really long, I'm just going to go through the process once and then I'll just speed up the video while I'm drawing everything out. But before I get into drawing, the first thing I'm going to do is create an oval shape for my speech bubble using the ellipse tool. Once again, no fill and with about a 3 or 4 point stroke. And just like with the panel borders, to be able to work with this shape, I'm going to have to expand it first. To do that, I'll just go up to Object in the top menu and choose Expand, and then click OK to both the fill and stroke. Once I've done that, I can start drawing. So I'll grab my brush tool and then go over to my brushes menu, and once again, if you don't see the brushes menu in the right hand column, you can go up to the window tab in the top menu and open it from the drop down menu. As far as what style of brush to use, I'm just using one of my standard inking brushes. If you want to learn how to create brushes like this, once again, watch my video on how to draw in Adobe Illustrator. So I'm going to pick a stroke weight for my brush that's roughly the same thickness as the stroke I use for my oval shape. Now I'm just going to draw a tail for the speech bubble. Depending on where you're going to be placing the bubble, you can put that tail anywhere you want. Just one quick tip, when you're working with the brush tool in Illustrator, if you double click on the brush tool icon, it'll open up the paintbrush tool option menu. I strongly suggest that you keep the fidelity set to smooth. This will keep all of your lines looking crisp and clean. If you keep the fidelity set to accurate and you have a shaky hand, then you're going to get a squiggly line. But even if you have a shaky hand and you set the fidelity to smooth, you'll get a smooth, clean line. Okay, so here's the process that I'm only going to show you once. What you want to do now is select all of your lines and go up to Object in the top menu and choose Group. Once everything's grouped, go back up to Object and choose Expand Appearance. Then go back up to Object one more time, choose Live Paint, and then Make. And finally, go back up to Object one last time and choose Live Paint and then Expand. You're going to be repeating those same 4 steps for everything we draw from here on out. Now with your Direct Selection tool, that's the white arrow, you can now select and delete all the lines that you don't want. And there you go, a very simple way to create a speech bubble. Now if you're going to be using your bubbles for the cover of your book, you're going to have to fill your bubbles in with white. To do that, grab your selection tool and select your bubble. Then go up to Object, down to Live Paint and choose Make. Now you can use your bucket tool to fill in your bubble with the color white. So now using the exact same process, I'm going to create a thought bubble. For the thought bubble, you don't have to use a tapered brush. You can just use a standard brush. To keep this video from going extremely long, I'm going to speed up the video right here. So what you're looking at here is the exact same process. Remember to always overlap your strokes when drawing your bubbles so that you get a nice clean joint. Also, keep in mind that if you're creating shapes with the ellipse or rectangle tool, before you can manipulate those objects, you have to first expand them and turn them into fills instead of strokes, just like we did with the panels. You can do that by selecting your shape and then going up to Object and choosing Expand. And again, once you're done, you're going to have to bucket fill it with white. So just go through the same process you did with the speech bubble. And finally, for the action bubble, just like the thought bubble, you can just use a standard brush. What you're basically going to be creating is an explosion shape surrounded by a few small puffs of smoke, very similar to the thought bubble cloud. Again, remember to overlap your strokes and make sure that there's a nice little gap between your 2 strokes. For the clouds on this one, I'm actually using a tapered brush because I'm going to be keeping some of those little hooks for aesthetic reasons. I don't leave those hooks on my thought bubbles because I'm usually putting text inside the bubble and I don't want the text to run into them. But for the smoke bubble, I tend to leave a few of the hooks. When creating an action bubble, it's never a bad idea to add in a few random lines between the smoke clouds and the explosion to show movement. Now if you're going to be using this graphic for the interior of your blank comic book, then you can leave it just the way it is. But if you're going to be using it for your cover, then you're going to want to bring some color into it. To do that, I'm just going to select it, then go up to the Object tab and from the drop-down menu, choose Live Paint and then Make. I just want to be able to bucket fill the entire thing black. The next thing I'm going to do is go back up to the Object tab and expand it. This will allow me to merge the black stroke and the fill together using my Pathfinder tool. If you don't see the Pathfinder icon in your right-hand tool menu, you can open it up from the Window tab drop-down in the main menu. Now once I've merged it, with it still selected, I'm going to head over to my Appearance panel and change the fill color to yellow. Next, I'll add a stroke to my shape. But instead of having the stroke on the outside of the shape, which makes the shape bigger, I'm going to put the stroke on the inside of my shape so that it stays the same size. I'll make the stroke about 4 points and I'll change the color to a shade of orange. Next, I'll go down to the bottom of the Appearance menu and click on the Add New Stroke button. As you can see, another stroke just appeared on top of my first stroke. I'll make this stroke the color black and I'll set its position to the outside. I'll keep the line weight fairly thin, maybe just 1 or 2 points. Now if you want to take this action bubble even further, you can always add in a few stars using the star tool. I'll just keep the fill and stroke colors yellow and black. Now so that we can use this graphic on our cover, we're going to have to bucket fill the smoke clouds with whites. So I'm just going to select everything, go up to Object and choose Group. Then I'll go back up to Object and choose Expand. And then one more time I'll go back up to Object and choose Live Paint and then Make. Now I'll be able to bucket fill my smoke clouds. Now keep in mind that you're probably going to want to add in some type of comic font that says bang or boom or pow or something like that, just to finish it off. Okay, so as far as graphics for your comic book cover and interior, that's pretty much all you need. So what I'm going to do now is speed up the video and lay out the front and back cover of my blank comic book, just so you can get a better idea of how to work with these graphics. Now these techniques that I just showed you are not limited to being used inside of panels. For my book cover, I'm going to use the Starburst graphic technique for my background. And as you can see, I'm just going through the exact same steps that I just showed you. Now, if you're going to put text on the back of your cover, it's always a good idea to use some type of buffer between the text and the background image, just to make sure that your text is legible. I'm going to use a simple rectangle with a gradient on it. It's also a good idea when creating a cover for any book to make sure that the cover accurately represents the contents of the book. Since this is a blank comic book template, I'm going to add some blank comic book panels to my cover. Again, I'm just using the exact same techniques that I just showed you. Okay, so what I'm about to tell you is the most important part of this video, so listen up. When laying out your cover, do not copy anyone else's cover. I know it's tempting to look at a blank comic book cover that has already sold thousands of copies and think to yourself, I'm just going to copy that one. Big mistake. If you look at those books that have sold thousands of copies, you'll probably notice that most of them were uploaded between 2016 and 2019. Back in those days, there were only a handful of blank comic book templates in the Amazon marketplace. But today, there are thousands of them. There's way more competition today than there was back in 2016. And if you want to compete, you're going to have to stand out from the rest. There are no shortage of books that are trying to copy the big sellers. The Amazon marketplace is full of them, and most of them are not selling very well. This book here is almost a direct copy of this big seller from 2017, and it was uploaded in 2018, just 1 year later, and it's barely selling at all. If we look at the sales ranking for this book, you can see it's around 3.5 million. Now, if we take a look at my book, which I uploaded in 2020, almost 2 years after that book, my sales ranking is around 900,000, which is not a great sales rank by any means, but it's a heck of a lot better than 3.5 million. At least I'm selling books somewhat consistently. And the reason is, I'm not copying anyone else, so my book kind of stands out a bit from all the other ones around it. So if you actually want to sell your blank comic book, then you need to make sure that your book's cover and interior stand out from all the others as much as possible. When you're choosing a color palette for your blank comic book cover, try to use colors that are complementary and that work well together. For your most important text, try utilizing multiple strokes around your font face. It'll just make those words pop a little bit more. Also, since you have all of those empty speech bubbles and thought bubbles on your cover, you may as well use them to give further details about your book, like the page count or any other details you think are important. Use your cover space wisely. As for the back cover of your book, give a brief description as to what the book is about and let people know what they can expect to find inside of it. But whatever you do, don't leave a lot of empty space on the back. Your back cover is prime advertising real estate for you to promote yourself. If you upload a lot of low-content books to Amazon, create an authors page for yourself. If you'd like me to create a video on how to do that, let me know in the comment section below. Now, what you can do once you have an authors page is purchase a custom URL from someplace like GoDaddy and then point that URL at your authors page. The URL I use is craigbabinbooks.com, and I put that URL on the back of all my books. It's just one more way to upsell to your customers. Alright, so you can see that with just a little bit of imagination that you can still create a comic book cover that is somewhat unique. So spend a little time on your cover and try to come up with a design that's uniquely yours. Well, there you have it. A simple way to create some really cool comic book graphics that you can use to create your very own blank comic book template to sell on Amazon. Now, if you'd like to see what one of these blank comic book templates looks like printed out, or if you have an artistic loved one and you're looking for a birthday or an early Christmas gift, my blank comic book template is available on Amazon, and I have a link to it in the description below. And keep in mind, if you purchase this book, you'll be supporting my channel, which enables me to continue making free content like this for you. So for that, I thank you. Now, if you have any questions or comments about what I'm doing here, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. As always, I decide what video I'm going to do next based on which of my previous videos are getting the most likes. So if you want to see more content like this, then give this video a thumbs up and let me know that you like it. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I have 2 other videos that pertain to this same topic. One is on how to draw in Adobe Illustrator, and the other is how to create low content books to sell on Amazon. If you'd like to see either of those videos, you can find a link to them right here. Until next time, take care.